Welcome to Everyday Entrepreneurs Everywhere with your host, Chris Parker.
And we are back with Everyday Entrepreneurs Everywhere. I'm Chris Parker, and I'm here with Bill Ryan. And Bill is in the U.S., in Louisville. And we know each other from the OpenEXO network, the Exponential Organization network at openexo.com. And I'm really curious to see how Ryan and his work, working with organizations, how he brings the exponential thinking and doing into his work. So, Bill, thank you so much for joining. Can you let us know, Bill, what is it that you do and why do you do what you do?
Chris, and thanks for having me. As we talked earlier, this is a great opportunity to learn more and share more, and I do appreciate the opportunity. I've been 5 years on my own, and really, I think the best part about being on my own is the fact that I've never been alone. What I do is I'm a learner, and I'm a translator more than anything else. I work with a lot of different companies in the learning and professional development areas, but I help them specifically when they are dealing with remote workers, helping do performance support and working with companies to, develop programs to help, lead their people at a distance, different times, that kind of thing. My focus really is to help, the people in the roles do their jobs more effectively, more efficiently, more safely, and help them be successful. So they can go home, at nighttime to their families and have a good, positive life.
And it must be really disappointing for you because no one is working remote these days.
I know. And I've been doing remote work for most of my career. I mean, I was doing, we used to call it CBTs back in the 1980s. I was doing work with video discs. So I've been involved in e-learning and online learning and remote learning for the majority of my career. And over the last 6 months, I've had more conversations by people who wanted to learn about the idea, can you do this stuff remotely? Than probably in the last 6 years where I've been knocking on doors going, hey, I can help you, meet your remote workers' needs. Let's talk. Mm-hmm. And now it's more about, how do you engage people at a distance? Okay, we can talk about that. And so, yeah, it's actually been one of those times where it's been, great opportunity to have conversations about how do you engage people? How do you listen, deeply? How do you, take the time to make sure people are okay? I did a vlog on compassion, and I was kind of interested because it appeals to me as a leader of people in my own work. But I was really kind of surprised how many people came back to me going, compassion? And I'm like, oh yeah, we need to be compassionate at this point in time, especially people working and living and with new coworkers that they also call their family.
Yeah. So I would love to, after this, get the link to your compassion vlog, and we can include that in the show notes so people can find that easily. Why is this important to you? What drives you to that learning and translating mission that I think has really been a red thread through your career, as I've seen?
So I started out my career in communications. I worked in television and radio. So I like technology, and I minored in computer science. And so there's been an interest in technology, but I think what drives me is what I like is not the tech as much as the idea that it helps get a solution to anybody, anytime, anywhere. It's expanding that access. And so when I talk about, the idea that I'm a translator, what I found as I went through my career was that people all had the same purpose, and there was an alignment, but we spoke different languages. The IT people wanted to solve the same problems in the business that the human resource people did, that the people in the operations area did, but everybody had a different language. And they didn't seem to understand the differences. And I like solving those kind of problems. Bringing people together and having that conversation is key. And even if you have to do it remotely, as we are now, but
Mm-hmm.
it's the idea of helping people gain that understanding and then watching them align to that common purpose. Now it's a shared issue, and then creating that kind of a solution that can be replicated. For me, it's all about, I don't want to solve the problem once. What I really want to do is find a way to help solve whatever that problem is so that it never becomes a problem anymore. It's in the workflow, it's in the process flow. It just becomes normal and across an organization. I used to walk through, so I supported a call center environment, and I used to walk through, the floor, and I would love to watch people just be successful and have these problems and watch them pull up the tools that we had, trained them on and work on the ways to interact with the customer on the phone and watch them smile, because that was the kind of solution. They didn't even know at that point in time how much work had been involved or what was behind the scenes. All they knew is they were helping somebody who needed help. And I was at that point going, and I helped them. And that's kind of a driver for me.
Well, and I also love that, like, working in ERP projects and technology projects, and that moment when, the client, if you will, the head of accounting or whatever, comes back with more creative and more insightful solutions than I could ever have done. And they're like, they've arrived. They do not need me as a consultant. And that is just so delightful. So you shared that you that went on your own, so to speak, or started your own, firm, I guess, about 5 years ago. What was the motivation of doing that? Because you have, CIO, Chief Information Officer and Chief Learning Officer, big titles in nice organizations and consistent paychecks and coffee on the desk. You walked away from all that for the adventure of entrepreneurial, ambition. How did that happen?
No, honestly and truly. So I am very fortunate. My bride is brilliant, and I came home one night where I was doing the work was fascinating, but the situation around it was there's a lot of budget cutting, and there was just people get fearful, and there was a point, I think, in many people's lives, at least I've talked to some others, there's a point in your age where you kind of look and go, it's not that important. It's, the world is not blowing up. We will fix this if you just take a deep breath. And the people at that point weren't taking a deep breath. And my bride looked at me and said, you love what you do, but this isn't making you happy. Why don't you find an opportunity to do the things that you love to do, and with people that would be fun to work with? And it really is one of those, we can't do that. We have, younger children, I have twins, and at the time, they were getting ready to be teenagers and college, and it's like, no, this is about quality of life. And she's right. And she was, and she is, and continues to be. And it was that opportunity to start working with people that the best part of this particular lifestyle is that I do have kind of a broad set of skills. There's not a lot of folks that I've run across that have that kind of technological background, having been a CIO and having been an e-learning person as an instructional designer. That's my master's. And then having been a chief learning officer as well at some point, looking at, very strategic aspects of helping people, plan workforces that they're going to need in 18 months. So doing career pathing and skill training, all those kind of things. And it's actually an opportunity to work with different companies that have a goal of their own in mind, and they can't figure out how to get from their idea to their audience. And I worked with a number of smaller and mid-sized companies that have been kind of, if I could only reach them, well, we can do that. Let me help you.
Yeah.
And that has continued to be, a driver where in part of my day, I may be doing some e-learning design. And in part of my day, I may be helping them say, and in 14 to 24 months, we need to have these things prepared now so that those people can start beginning it so they're ready to step into those roles in that 14 to 24 months. And it allows me to kind of play upon all the different strengths I have and the interests I have as well.
And I love your passion about it as well. So, so if people are listening instead of watching, I'm, on the video here, his eyes are sparkling as he's telling the story. I love it. And on williamjryan.com, your website of your company, there's a process there. It's listen, discover, strategize, transform, and then implied is repeat in the graphic. Yes. Can walk us through that? So if an organization is struggling with engaging at a distance, if that's a learning at a distance, maybe you can rephrase it better what they're struggling with. What does that journey look like?
Well, it really starts with listening. I think sometimes a skill that I don't emphasize enough is and in context for a second, having been in corporate America, having been in, I work for a statewide system, there's points where I would work with different organizations and I would hire consultants. And I have nothing against consultants. Please.
Consultants are people too, sometimes.
Yeah. But one of the challenges is that a lot of times they come in with a solution already in place. And what I would often say is you have a whole skill set, and I've seen services you provided, but listen to us first. And it isn't the fact that we're the only ones that do it this way. And I run into those kind of things. And even within a business, sometimes part of your one business unit doesn't do it the same way as another. I ran into that once in this call center world where we had the same kind of phone system, but one group only transferred it people one way and the other group transferred it a different way. And I'm like, it's the same phone system. So I understand that, there's a little bit of territorialism, but I would sometimes want to go to the consultants and say, listen to us first, and then let's talk about that. So for me, it just starts out with, let me hear truly, on a deep level of where your pain points are. And then it kind of dives down into that whole discovery part where I kind of go to them and say, show me the data. Because the other part about this is it's rubrics. And it's operational rubrics is where I go after it. I know this might sound, a little, kind of like heresy from a learning person, but I really don't put a lot of value in how many clicks somebody takes on an e-learning course or even what they get on an e-learning course. Now, from a curriculum perspective, I kind of look at that, to see if it's, being designed properly, if it's effective in that regard. But what really drives me is what's the performance at the point where it matters. Let's measure what matters, and what matters is, out in the business. So, discovering where those, data points are, internal audit, the Six Sigma teams, the lean teams, those are the people that have that can identify and let me discover what's really being, hurt, where that pain point is. And then you can kind of, take a couple of steps backwards and start looking about it. And that's where the strategy comes in. Is this is it a training issue? Is it an education issue? Is it a ergonomic issue? Is it a process and procedure issue? It could be so far outside of what, people think. A lot of times they come up and go, it's a training problem. Well, maybe it's not. Maybe it's supply chain. People are, doing something because something's not being delivered at the right time. So that's when you have that opportunity to really step back and identify, based on the data of where the pain points are, then kind of figure out a strategy to create a solution. And then you've got the rubric that matters to see if when you start implementing it, if that changes that rubric, if the meter moves at that point in time. And that's where the transformation process comes in, because once you start showing those results to the operational people, then it becomes theirs. And 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 I think it's theirs all the way through, and they own that because you've been listening to them. But once they start to see the transformational aspect, based on the data, their data,
Yeah.
then they own it, and then they move toward, at that point in time, as a good consultant, I have now worked my way out of it because, to use your example, they've come up with their ideas and they've got ways to even refine and hone the process and make it even better.
And I'm curious on the first step, listen. How often does your client organization or that individual that you're working with actually know their problem, the true problem?
Great question.
Because in lean world and stuff, I think it's like the 5 whys type of techniques of unpacking and unpacking and unpacking and unpacking. So how often is it clear in the beginning of what's going on, and if not, how do you help them?
You just gave away the answer right there. Honestly and truly, it's so funny you say that.
Okay.
I'm a big fan of the 5 whys. It works. And how often? Very rarely. It's almost to the point where they know there's a problem and there's pain, whether it's staffing issues or productivity or safety, there's a pain point, and they've got that down. And it is unpacking it. And I'm a big fan of the 5 whys, to be honest with you. It's the ability to create the conversation, to start, going out, and that kind of comes back into that discovery phase where you start getting the data.
Yeah. I think as you describe yourself as a learner implies to me, curiosity. And you shared with me one of the reasons that you jumped on the opportunity to be on the podcast was also to learn about podcasting. So I'm just this theme of learning. And I think with 5 whys, and I'm about to ask you to describe the 5 whys and maybe give a story there. If you're not curious to keep peeling the onion, then well, I'm working on a project right now in the fashion retail, and the problem they've asked me to solve is the question was technology, and the journey I'm taking is actually really at the customer experience in the front on the business side, because it's like, well, what are you wanting to do with this technology, and why is it actually a problem for you? And they're not exactly certain. And if you're talking about an investment strategy across multiple channels and touch points, show me the data of what's happening. And they're not used to that line of thinking and inquiry. So I'm really delighted to hear what you're saying. So can you, share your vision on the 5 whys, and maybe if you have a war story there, it'd be fun.
Well,
if you can share it, I don't know.
Sure. Trying to think of one. One of the questions that I sometimes preface before I dive deep is I'll ask somebody, what happens if we don't solve this problem? And that usually stops them. They go, why are you here? If you're not here to solve my problem, why are you here? But I look at them and go, from your perspective, from the operational business angle, what would happen if we don't solve this problem? So I'm trying to think of something. So I was working in a company that did home health, and there's a power and a beautiful, and I don't mean power in a bad way, but a wonderful energy when you go out with clinicians that go into someone's home, and it's about the quality of life of helping mostly seniors stay in their homes, and instead of going into retirement communities or hospitals. And it was one of the highlights of that particular role at that time. And one of the situations that came up was, again, driven by internal audit. Hand washing isn't a very important part of clinical care. And the question that had come up was that when people went out to do home visits, they would wash their hands and then they'd go in the house. And what happens when you walk into someone's home and you meet people right away? Before COVID-19, what would be the first kind of reaction that would happen? People would walk in and shake hands. and it's rude not to shake hands. But then they start moving into their, because they're in their mindset of working with a patient. And it's like, we had to stop and say, you got to wash your hands. And the best part was so we have to create a training program, and I kind of came back and was like, why do we have to make a training program? And well, because they're not washing hands. And 2 or 3 questions later, the chief nursing officer that I was working with at the time came back and said, because she was brilliant, because she came back and said, they know how to wash their hands. What we have to do is create, the understanding and the awareness. And if we have the conversation and remind them. And it was one of those aha moments where, I wasn't going to do a training program. We didn't need it. People know how to wash their own hands, especially nurses, and out of that came more of a communication plan. As they visited their regional offices and got their assignments, and constant communication.
Yeah.
So it supported their performance, and it reminded them of the importance and the value. But it wasn't a training problem, and asking the whys brought the person who really knew the answer to the forefront, and that became transformational, and the problems dropped. The internal audit numbers got better, and it was driven by them. Honestly and truly, it's one of those times where I look back and go, I didn't do a doggone thing, to be honest with you.
Well, as a coach and consultant, you asked the right questions, and I think you challenged their I don't know, expectation or paradigm of how to solve problems, which probably saved them a lot of money and was much more impactful. So, no, lovely story. I can see it happening too. You can sort of see the people coming in and also being really compelled just to shake hands. I think COVID has solved some of that. I was with a dear friend today over lunch, and we actually bumped butts because we didn't know what else to do. So like we get, in the Netherlands, you can oftentimes say, hug and kiss, but I was like, well, let's just bump butts, and boop. And then, she thought that was awkward. So, but okay, so let's we can get away with murder these days. I'm curious on EXO, I guess the opportunities of learning, distance learning, collaboration are tremendous if you think really exponentially about the possibilities and the technologies available. What is it about the Open EXO and the EXO mindset and attributes that attracted you to that, I guess, world of thought?
It was kind of new to me. I'm almost embarrassed to admit that, because as I bought the book and started reading it, it was like, wow, duh. It was, and I don't. It was one of those. I've kind of been doing this anyhow. I just didn't know there was a word for it.
Yeah.
And a framework. I think one thing that I liked about the EXO framework that aligns with just kind of how I work was the idea that you have this you work maximizing all the resources you have available, people, technology, find out what you have, figure out how to leverage it, find out the way to create that community. So it's not just somebody, pushing, it's people together. It's joining together. It's encouraging that kind of community to use their resources and for the common good, for the greater good, and engaging them. And I think, that kind of helps you scale things up across an organization. And something that I do naturally, I think from an enterprise perspective. I don't look, I've never been very good at saying, you're in charge of this training group, you just support these people.
Mm.
I just don't do that. Um, you know, um, I look across how we can create something that you can create once and then distribute in many ways. When I was at this health insurance company, one of the things that this is in the middle 2000s, and we were bringing we're trying to bring an LMS into the organization, and what we really wanted to do was at the time would have been more of an LCMS, and those were very, very costly at the time. But again, just the way I think, and I like IT, so I make friends, and they had a content repository that they already bought. They had bought a tool that because they were expanding their service centers and their call centers, both domestically and globally. So they needed a common place to store policies and procedures and scripts, all those kind of things that, needed. And I went, I'm learning this and having the conversation and saying, what else can it store? Mm-hmm. Documents, yes. Videos, yes. Graphic images, yes. Like, I have a content repository. So we ended up having a much smaller course management system that we just linked to the content repository, and out of that we were doing by 2005-06, we were doing reusable content objects or shareable content objects, however you call it. That was the model we were putting in place so that we could create once and distribute in many different channels, and also share them so that good example was the phone system. We had multiple business units, and they all had some kind of tweak about how they the scripts they used and some of the processes, but some of the like creating a consistent method of transfer, we created those modules, and then depending on the business unit, we just linked back to those particular objects and shared them. So this is the EXO kind of model of creating that kind of shared ability across an organization, and getting people together and linked together, I think just appealed to me.
Great. Well, I will include a link to the book, Exponential Organization's book, and also openexo.com. I noticed that you have taken the Foundations certification, which is a free training for anyone listening to learn about what we're talking about if you don't already know. And I love the example of, because one of the attributes is leveraged assets, and that's oftentimes used like as an Airbnb example of using other people's beds and things like that. But I think it's also equally, look inside what assets you can already leverage. And some people call it sweat the assets, or reuse before buy, before build. A lot of investment principles you can apply there. So, for me, the exponential organization, the EXO approach, is one of those ones that, it feels like common sense, and why hadn't we already known that before? And then it's like, okay, well, it gives me a language and a framework to have a conversation. So, cool. I've got a question for you, which is, I think we've been pretty much off script the whole time, but having fun with it. But one of the things, and you're a distance learning expert and a learner and a creator. What I'm hearing a lot from people, in executives, in masterminds, etc., that what people are missing now at a distance is what I am been more just calling the serendipity moments, because we're so task oriented on Zoom. Before this, you and I had some serendipity moments talking about fatherhood, and and that was delightful. However, in more structured professional settings, people are getting on Zoom. They're working at a distance, and the water cooler moments, or the accidental bumps in the hall, where things are solved, and when you see someone's face frowning in the hall, and you say, "Hey, what's going on?" and they share a problem with you, and you say, "Oh, I solved that yesterday. Here you go." That sort of just velocity of togetherness at a distance. Do you have any? And do you have any idea how to help people have more serendipity moments at a distance and learn from each other that way?
Yeah, I do. And there's a couple
Yay.
of, yeah, I do really.
Now, if anyone wants to know these things, you have to go to williamjryan.com. No,
Thank
so
you,
let's,
you. But we're back to common sense. Honestly and truly, there's a couple of things that I think drive those moments, and part of it is leadership has to be willing to do, I think, two key things, and the first one is drop part of your agenda, just drop it, and the second thing is have just a little trust, and here's what I mean by that. So here's the example. Here's we have a meeting. It's going to be 60 minutes. Well, first of all, let's make it 55 because people need 5 minutes to go fill up their coffee cup and they need other things to do. So let's do that first. Okay. Let's respect the fact that we are sitting more than we could be 5 minutes late for a meeting because we're walking down the hallway. Well, let's just build that in. So that's one thing. Trust that people will do things. But the second thing is start your meeting off and let's just talk. I actually coached one small group. And what they're doing now is they're supposed to be at work at 8:00, and what they're having right now is coffee at 8:30, and it's not required. It is not mandatory. It is 15 minutes. Open Zoom, show up, bring your coffee cup, bring a bagel. We don't care. Bring your kid, and the leader's like, but that should be work time. I'm like, give it up. They're not. If you were at work, you might be going to fill up your coffee cup in the coffee room. You might be putting your bagel and eating it at your desk. Who knows? So just give it up. See what happens. And he actually has come back to me and said, first of all, I had a couple of people that were like getting sick all the time, and I noticed that they're there all the time because we're just having conversations. And I said, okay. So the next thing is on Friday afternoons. 3:00, 3 to 4, open mic time. Just drop by. And at 4:00, it's okay if you have something else in your coffee cup. I'll be on, and I'll have something in my coffee cup that might not be coffee. and the guy looked at me and he started, and by now he's going, I can't condone that. I said, hey, I'm not asking you what's in your coffee cup. I said, let people have a conversation, because you're right. We like, I work with people. Your background is in technology. You work with, technology to provide solutions, but you're not working with boxes. You're working with people who are going to touch boxes and interact with stuff in boxes, but ultimately, even they have to provide something that another person is going to have to access. So we need this connection. And what I will coach anybody and suggest as hard as I can, forget the high tech, focus on the high touch.
Yeah. I love it. I was actually, having a conversation with someone earlier, and I was advising your technology selection is irrelevant because that will change. Please select the humans that will be building and managing your technology for you. That is eminently more important. They're like, okay. So last question, and this is I hadn't actually connected it, but one of the ways that I have habitually been creating serendipity in conversations, in meetings, corporate meetings, particularly with architects and technology people at the end, and you're not necessarily a deep tech person, is at the end of those meetings, I ask, how do you feel? And then they say, well, I think, and I said, no, how do you feel? And that the additional conversation that sparks, because some techie who's maybe more introverted was like, I'm not feeling good about this. Wow, great, thank you. Tell me, or the person who's maybe is a typically a downer goes, like, I'm feeling good about this. Like, oh wow. So, Bill, last question for you, and then we'll wrap up. I've been entranced, and so we're actually over the time, but that's our prerogative. So, how are you feeling about your first, experience as a guest on a podcast?
I'm actually positive because I'm walking away from this experience with more energy than I walked in with, and that's always a positive value sign for me. I am a little bit of an introvert, The book Quiet, I think, was written for me. I had a strong echo in my life of going, oh yeah, that's me. But having that connection, this is what you've taught me. So here's my learning moment of a podcast is it's about developing and creating a connection with the person that creates the conversation. And I knew that already because that's how I work with clients. Can't really listen to them if you don't connect with them and hear them here as well as here. So you have reinforced that attribute is a strength, which you, by the way, have demonstrated in this kind of process as well. And I think the whole issue of being remote. I think one of the differences we can make in a remote space is that when you're in a conference room, there's you and all these people around you, like all the way down there. Mm. But here, I can actually have I can talk to you, I can see you, and even if you have 20 people in a room, if someone's talking and you can have a picture, you can see that person, and you create a connection.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you for being here, Bill. And for those who would love to benefit from Bill's insights and his listening and his discovering and strategizing, you can get him at williamjryan.com and also William J. Ryan on LinkedIn. On his podcast page on abrilliant.com, I will also include those links, as well as hopefully his vlog on compassion. He mentioned a book called Quiet that I'll put a link in there for that as well. So you can follow up on some of these jewels that he shared with us. So Bill, thank you so much for joining. I'm really, I've just enjoyed this moment with you.
I appreciate it too, Chris. This has been a delight, and I appreciate you sharing your day with me and letting me share mine with yours.
Learn more at abrilliant.com/podcast.